Great. All righty. Well, we're glad all of you could join us today. This is the webinar on how to access the more than $7 billion that are available for schools and addressing the homework gap. So we're joined by, actually I'm joined by 5 esteemed panelists today. We have NAFIS members with us, Dr. Deborah Dennison, who is the superintendent at San Carlos Unified School District in Arizona. Dr. Reginald Eggleston, who is superintendent, and Mr. Carl D. Armand, who is the chief information officer at Geary County Schools in Kansas. We also have 2 DC policy experts, Nicole Jarvis, the NAFIS assistant for policy and advocacy, and John Bernstein, the principal of the Bernstein Strategy Group. So for the flow of today's webinar, I'll ask John will start the conversation about the expansion of the E-rate program and a little bit more background about some of the COVID money. Nicole will discuss the Emergency Broadband Benefit program. And then we'll hear from the NAFIS members, Dr. Dennison, Dr. Eggleston, Mr. DeArmond, to learn about how they address the homework gap, which last year really was more a learning gap, because you needed access not just in the after hours of school for homework, but for the entirety of the learning day. And then also maybe some of their plans moving forward and how they think they may be able to use this additional dollars for their school district for next year. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the session. So John, I'm going to ask you to get started and I will give you a little bit more of an intro so that people recognize we're very fortunate to have John with us today. John's really been the lead advocate on the E-rate program for the last, 10, 15, 20 years. And this increase in funding has a lot to do with the work that he's dedicated over many years, and especially in the last year, to get this whopping $7 billion infusion of funds into an expansion for E-rate. So John, why don't you get started? And I think we've got it set up for you to share your screen because I do believe you've got some slides.
Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining here. I'm very excited to be able to present on the Emergency Connectivity Fund. This is a fund that has been more than a year in the making. And I'm so pleased to actually have all of you as my guinea pigs to do this presentation. So I've not had a chance to do this yet since we really just got this money. So let me start with the headlines here. And I will make these slides available to Hillary so she can share them with you. You don't have to take copious notes. But what I want to do is share with folks a couple of key points here. First of all, how did we get here? Back in March of this year, towards the end of March, Congress passed the American Rescue Plan Act. Within that act is a $7.17 billion emergency connectivity fund. And that fund is supposed to be to help students and educators get connected to the internet in their homes and to provide them with appropriate educational devices. The act that passed was on something known as budget reconciliation. So there's not a ton of detail that was actually part of the actual statute. That left it to the Federal Communications Commission to implement this. And I'm pleased to say that last month, actually this month, only a couple of weeks ago, the Federal Communications Commission unanimously approved its rules to implement the Emergency Connectivity Fund. And we will be talking extensively about what's in those rules a little bit later on. Here's the timeline going forward, and I want folks to pay particular attention to this. We are expecting the initial application window to open somewhere in the next 30 to 60 days. So somewhere between end of June, sometime in July, the FCC is going to open a 45-day application window. It's the first application window for folks to apply. That window will close probably July, August timeframe, and then we expect money to start flowing from the folks who applied. If there is any money left over after this initial application window, there may be a second window that's open. And that window will either be for prospective funding or retrospective funding for items already purchased. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But I think for everybody's purposes, I'm going to emphasize this repeatedly. There may only be one window. You may only have one shot to actually get money for this program. So please bear that in mind. Let's take a step back. And I think this is going to cover sort of what both I'm talking about, what Nicole is talking about. Even before we had COVID, we had something known as the homework gap. And I'm sure folks around the table here are pretty familiar with it. And essentially what this means is the situation where students would go home after school, teachers would even go home themselves, and they'd have either no internet access or they'd have very limited internet access, not at speeds that are particularly helpful. Additionally, there were lots of kids who lacked devices as well, appropriate devices, not just phones, but devices that you can do schoolwork on. In fact, in 2020, when everybody went home, Common Sense Media went out and did a study. And based on the data they had at the time, which was largely census data from 2018, they thought that upwards of 17 million students were unconnected or lacked a device when they were at home. And 400,000 educators, I mean, let's pause there for a moment. 400,000 educators have no internet access at home or do not have a device. That's a problem. And by the way, I will note, and we'll dig into this a little deeper later, a lot of those people lived in rural and outlying areas and in tribal lands. That's where you're seeing a lot of this deficit. It's obviously also in inner cities as well, where there are cost prohibitions, where it's very expensive to get internet access. But by and large, I think we're talking a lot about rural areas that lacked access of any kind, that there simply was very difficult to run fiber lines out to people's homes or apartments or wherever they live. So the data here is pretty obvious, right? 37% of rural Americans didn't have home internet access. Low-income folks, low-income households, about a third of those lacked internet access. African-American households, Hispanic households, 25%, 23% of those lacked access. That was back in 2018. And then COVID hit. And even after we received CARES Act money, even after there was other state and local funds made available, and some progress was made in terms of handing out devices, in terms of connecting students and teachers in their homes, even after that, there are still, according to Common Sense Media, as of January 2021, 12 million students who lacked access. We don't actually have a number for teachers midway through the pandemic here, but obviously a significant amount of students. And a lot of students in particular places, Alabama, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Mississippi, 40 to 50% of those students lacked access. I've seen studies of Mississippi that indicate that more than half of the kids who live in the Mississippi Delta region have no access whatsoever. So there are reasons for this, and I talked about this, and Common Sense Media tried to get into this. And what they found, by and large, is that the vast majority of these folks just couldn't afford it. 9 of the 12 million kids were from, either low-income homes or, homes that just simply could not afford or did not want to afford to have internet access at home or have an appropriate device. And then we have the fact that there's, as I mentioned, up to 4 million students, mainly rural and Native American, didn't have any access because they simply lacked the broadband service. And you're going to hear from Deborah a little bit later about how that was a real problem where she resides. So I think you'll hear some validation there. So I want to talk a little bit about where we go from here, because we are obviously starting to wind down, hopefully, from the COVID pandemic. We're seeing case rates decline. We're seeing the last data I saw was something like 92% of schools have at least some form of in-person schooling going on right now, which is a far cry from where we were 6 months ago. But even after the pandemic ends and hopefully most kids go back to school, the homework gap's still going to be there. The reason the homework gap was there in the first place is not because we thought that everybody had to go to remote learning. It was because when kids went home, they needed to do homework at home. And a lot of kids a lot of educators were assigning homework that required the internet, that required online research, that oftentimes, and certainly for my kids' schools, they're on Google Docs, for instance, and they have to be able to submit onto Google Docs, and you need to be online to do that. There are a lot of textbooks that were virtual. So the homework gap was real before. It's certainly more real during, because it forced everyone online. And it will be real even after we think that the crisis has passed. So as we think about COVID going forward, I think we have to think about there are still needs that are going to have to be filled. And I will also note that even after the pandemic, there are districts that are already making plans to offer a virtual learning option as a permanent option. Not all of them. You may have heard New York City indicating that they want everyone to go back to school and they're not going to offer a virtual option. I will tell you that in my home district here, Fairfax County, Virginia, which is I think 10th or 11th largest district in the country, they actually said the same thing as New York City. And then 2 weeks later, they reversed course and now they're going to have a virtual option. So in order to make a virtual option a real option, all these kids need to be connected. The teachers need to be connected and they need to have appropriate devices. Otherwise, that's not a real choice. I'll also note that, even as of December of 2020, Rand Corporation found that 20% of districts were considering moving in this direction. And you're going to see more of this roll out over the coming weeks and months before the school goes back. But I think you're going to find a large number of school districts are going to actually offer this as a virtual option. And there's a reason for this, right? There's a reason they want to offer this option. One is that there is a percentage of kids who actually, despite the media narrative, did well online, who found themselves actually learning better, who found themselves without distraction, who found themselves not being bullied, who actually found themselves perhaps able to participate better through chats than they would if they were forced to raise their hand in classrooms. So I think that COVID has fundamentally changed how education is going to function. And while New York City may be trying to, go back to 2019, I'm not sure everyone else is or even wants to. So if that's the case, homework gap is still going to be even more real in 2021 than it was in 2019 and before that. And there's still going to be a need for dollars here. In fact, Common Sense Media, as part of a January 2021 study, indicated that there are significant costs associated with this. For students to permanently close the homework gap, we're talking about $6 billion to $11 billion in the first year, and then another $4 to $8 billion thereafter. Essentially, what they need to do is they need to continue to equip all students with devices, as I know Dr. Eggleston and Deborah have done in their districts, and they need to also have continuing costs paid for homework gap, for the homework internet access. So it's going to cost a lot of money to do this, and this first tranche of $7 billion may in fact be the first tranche. There may be more coming. So let's talk about the rules for this program. And this is really important for everybody to pay attention to because the rules are relatively extensive and I'm trying to boil these down for you as much as possible. So number one, the first thing you need to know is that these $7 billion are running through the existing E-rate program. Folks may be familiar with the E-rate. Hopefully they've all applied for the E-rate. It runs through an online portal. The Universal Service Administrative Company actually operates it. But it's going to be E-rate with a twist, and it's a separate pot of money. It is not E-rate dollars. It does not go to actually build up in-school facilities. It's about connecting kids and teachers at home. So first off, where it's similar. The same entities that are eligible for E-rate are eligible here. That means public and private K-12 schools and public libraries. And obviously tribal schools as well and libraries. They are all eligible. The equipment, though, is different. With E-rate, it's all about online service and Wi-Fi, and there are no end user devices. But this is different because we need to equip kids to be at home. So the eligible equipment here are going to be laptop computers, tablet computers, Wi-Fi hotspots, modems, routers, devices that combine modems and routers, although I will candidly admit I don't know what those devices are. They talk about them, but I don't know what they are. But there are things that are not going to be eligible. And amongst those things are desktop computers and mobile phones. Desktop computers, they're too expensive. Mobile phones, it's not clear those are great learning options. So there's already going to be some limitations here. But any type of laptop computer, any type of tablet computer available. However, well, not however, I will also note, unlike E-rate, which is a discount program where you get 20 to 90% off depending on your federal free and reduced price lunch rate, with the highest discount level being 90%. Unlike with E-rate, everybody gets 100% here. I know I sound like Oprah here. Everybody gets a free computer. That was a conscious decision made by Congress. It's in the statute. And as a result, no one's going to have to worry about paying any non-discounted costs. There's a caveat, because there's always a but. And the but here is that because there's a limited amount of funds, the FCC has built some guardrails in here. So yes, you can buy whatever you want in terms of laptop or tablet computers, but the program is only going to support up to $400 per computer and $250 per hotspot. If you buy devices that are more expensive than those, you're just going to have to find the money somewhere else. Additionally, there's other limits here too, because they want to be serious about this. One is they're only going to put in one fixed broadband connection per location. So for instance, if you are going to get a cable modem installed and that's going to be your home connection as opposed to a wireless connection, you're only going to be able to get one cable modem. You may be able to get routers to move the signal throughout the house, but you can only get one modem. Additionally, we're not going to hand out multiple computers to students. It's going to be one computer per student, per staff member, or library patron. So there are going to be a few limits here, so the money can go further. Eligible services continued. So beyond the equipment, there's also home internet access, and that's important. Home internet access is going to be available at 100% discount. Schools can purchase home internet access services. They can purchase them in bulk and distribute out whatever needs to be distributed out to those kids who are unconnected, which is great news. And a lot of things are covered here as well. The activation, the installation, any initial configuration, all that stuff is bundled in. Taxes and fees will be bundled in. So that's all paid for. There are some districts that advocated during this rulemaking and some companies that they wanted actually to be able to build out from the school, to take the signals that you're already receiving in the school, the broadband signals, and distribute them out to the nearby community, maybe by TV white spaces, maybe by building, coaxial lines, something like that. What ended up happening, though, as the compromise is the commission is going to allow build out to occur, but only in that very narrow circumstance where there are no other commercial providers in the area. And you're going to have to prove that, and that's not going to be easy to prove. So by and large, I think this money is not going to go for build out. It's really going to go for providing home internet access services sort of in isolation to homes, as opposed to build outs from schools. I'll also note there's things that are clearly ineligible. There's a lot of conversation about cybersecurity. I'm sure in some of your districts, you unfortunately may have been subject to hacking or ransomware attacks, and certainly that has gone on here. And it's a real problem. However, it's also very expensive to build in the cybersecurity protections. And again, that's mostly done at the network level, at the school district level. So cybersecurity tools, those are not going to be eligible for discount here, or eligible for purchase here. Similarly, learning management systems, everyone needs them now. I actually found out at the beginning of the pandemic that probably only about a quarter of districts had a learning management system, and then a lot of them wanted them in order to actually have a decent platform to run their programming off of when everything was remote. Those are important systems. Alas, they're not going to be paid for here. Standalone microphones, great to have, and video conferencing equipment, great to have, not eligible. And then finally, the Children's Internet Protection Act, as all of you are probably aware, is something that is part of E-rate. It requires every district and library who receives E-rate dollars to come up with an accessible use policy, to do a lot of public input on what the policy looks like, and that within that policy, they have to come up with technological protection measures like blocking and filtering to prevent minors from accessing inappropriate content. So SIPA is still going to be enforced here, and you're still going to have to try to figure out a way to make SIPA work as best you can. And it is complicated, so I'm not going to get into it today. But one thing that I will note, just like with E-rate, unfortunately, if you have to buy blocking filtering software, that's not going to be covered here either. So let's quickly talk about the application process, because I think this is critical, and everyone needs to be planning for this now. And I'll get into that in the next couple slides too. First of all, what the commission has decided is that they are interested in making sure that districts really reach the kids who haven't been reached yet. So for that reason, they are only going to allow in this first application window for school districts and libraries to apply for services and equipment that they have not yet purchased. It is only going to be for prospective purchases in this first application window. And those services and equipment can be purchased and delivered anytime between July 1, 2021 and June 30, 2022. If there is any money left over, it will be up to the FCC to decide how they want to use it. They could possibly open a second 45-day window in which they say, not enough people got a chance to apply in the first window for prospective purchases, so we're going to do that. Alternatively, they've also left open the door to going to retroactive reimbursement for things that districts already purchased. So for instance, back in March of 2020, I understand New York City's public schools made a massive purchase, got right in there and got as many one-to-one devices out to their kids as possible. Those are not eligible in the first window. They would like them to be eligible as quickly as possible. They may have a shot at it, and you may have a shot at previous purchases you have made if there's a second window that the commission decides on. And if they decide, what they will do is they will allow for reimbursement back to March 1 of 2020 through June 30, 2021 this year. So stay tuned for that. All right, so there's some regulations that you're not going to like because a lot of folks are going to want to be reimbursed. However, I will note that there's some good news. The good news is that unlike the E-rate, which has a very complicated bidding system, competitive bidding system, requires 28-day posting, requires particular RFPs, et cetera, none of that stuff applies. None of the E-rate competitive bidding applies. If you adhere to state, local, and tribal procurement rules, then you're golden. That is all you need to do to apply here. But those rules are going to vary. I'm sure they're going to vary just with the people on the call. So you need to be checking those out right now to see what you need to do in order to begin preparing to make purchases. And this is important, July 1 and after. Don't make any now. Please don't make any now. If you make purchases right now and expect to be reimbursed in the first application window, it's not going to happen. And it may never happen. So if you are plotting right now, signing contracts, hold off. You've got to hold off to July 1 if you want to be reimbursed for this program. Lastly, and I will note that this is pretty detailed language, but essentially what this language says, it's drawn right from the order, is that schools are going to have to make a number of certifications. And one of the certifications they're going to have to make essentially is that they're not double dipping, right? That they are not actually essentially getting money twice here from either COVID relief bills that have passed or other places, and from the Emergency Connectivity Fund to pay for the same thing. Waste, fraud, and abuse is a real problem. It is something that we want to keep an eye on. And it's really in everybody's best interest, right? There is harm here because if it becomes very public that there is waste, fraud, and abuse in this program, there won't be follow-on dollars. If we expect to be able to have the federal government to continue to be involved with funding homework gap programs, they're not going to do that if this looks like it's just been rife with fraud. So it's really important that folks are careful here, that they use these dollars in the narrow purposes that they're supposed to be used for, and they don't try to pay twice for the same receipt with these dollars and with other dollars that the federal government has provided. That's my soapbox on that. So lastly, here's my quick preparation advice. And if I haven't drilled it into you, this will hopefully drill it into you. Don't buy anything before July 1. Please don't do that to yourself. You will be very, very sad when your application is rejected. Secondly, amongst the certifications you're going to have to make is to the fact that you are buying things for students and educators who are unconnected, either at home or they lack devices. So it probably behooves you before everybody goes home to actually conduct a needs survey right now to figure out, if you don't already know, who's left, who isn't connected right now at home, who doesn't have an appropriate device, who do you expect who's coming into your districts that are going to have those problems. So make plans for that now by conducting a survey so you can certify with confidence what you need, and also to prepare for the purchases that you're going to have to make. Also, towards my point on the last slide, figure out where you've spent your COVID funds already, so that if we go back to retroactive reimbursement for things, you will know whether or not you used dollars that were inappropriate to use twice. I mean, you could conceivably get paid back and reimbursed for the things that have already been purchased, but not if you used COVID relief dollars for them, is my understanding. So just make sure you know what you spent on things like tablets, laptops, hotspots, and internet access services. And then this last thing, and I said this at the top, and I'll say it again because it bears repeating: don't miss the first window. Don't sleep on this. Don't think that there, if it doesn't happen this summer, it's fine. There'll be another window. There may not be. The $7 billion may go quickly, as we're already seeing, and Nicole will attest to after me. The EBB dollars are going quickly already. I think up to 1 million families have already applied for those dollars, and that's only been open 3 or 4 weeks. So don't miss the first window for E-rate, and think carefully about everything else that you need to do to be in a position to apply in that first window and apply quickly. It won't be first come, first served. I'll tell you that. And in fact, what will happen if it's oversubscribed in that first window is that they will resort to ranking, and they will rank based on the E-rate category 1 discount matrix, meaning those districts that have the highest discount percentage rates for E-rate are going to be the ones that come in first. So the 90% districts, New York, Miami, Chicago, maybe a few others, are going to come in first and get access to the money. Rurals will have a bump up, but you don't want to be in that world where you're not even in the game in the first window. So with that, I think there's my contact info, which folks can have. I'm going to get off here and turn this over to Nicole.
Thank you, John. And Nicole, while you're getting your slides ready, just want to remind folks that if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Also, for you that are not as familiar with the FCC, the term window is kind of their grant application opening timeline, but the FCC does use that terminology of the window.
All right. Great. Can you all see the slides?
Yep.
Good. Okay, thanks. All right. Hello, everyone. I am Nicole Jarvis. I'm the Assistant of Policy and Advocacy for NAFIS, and I'll just briefly talk about the EBB program that John just mentioned, the Emergency Broadband Benefit program. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so EBB is a program for households. It's much smaller. Well, it's smaller than E-rate, and it's a temporary program. And the reason we want to share some information about it with you all today is just to encourage you to share the information with your community, because the households apply for it. And it's, again, it's just a great pot of money out there for people in your community to apply for. So this program was launched May 12th. So fairly recently, and like John said, already 1 million people have applied for it. So the money will go fast. There's $3.2 billion dedicated to this. And it's, like I said, a temporary program to help households struggling to afford internet service during the pandemic. And the funding will end when it runs out, or 6 months after the end of the pandemic. So let's see. So EBB provides discounts to eligible households, and there are 2 ways they can receive this discount. It can either be on their monthly broadband service, or there's also an option for a one-time discount of up to $100 to purchase a laptop, desktop, or tablet. And these are applied directly to their monthly bill, and there's a limit of 1 monthly service discount and 1 device discount per household. And there's many different eligibility criteria that at least one person in the household has to meet. This is an extension of the Lifeline program. So if a household already qualifies for the Lifeline program, or any other low income program. You'll see on this list here, they already can qualify. There's also an additional option, an additional eligibility criteria that is available. Obviously, it's a COVID relief measure. So it's if a household has lost a significant amount of income, there's certain numbers that they have to meet and be able to prove, they can also qualify for this. And there is, of course, specific definition of a household as a group of people who live together and share money. And there on the website, there's all the details of what this looks like and doesn't. And there are specific providers that the households can access these, either the monthly broadband or the device through, and there's over 825 of those. And there's 3 different ways to apply. This is all on the website, but this is an example of actually one of the resources they share for promoting this program. Again, it's important to note that this is a temporary program. The funding will very likely run out. And once it does, the households that are in the program will have the option to opt in if they would like to continue with that monthly service. And then from that point forward, they'd have to pay for it all themselves without that discount. And so the big important piece to this is the FCC has a great outreach toolkit available on their website with all different kinds of ways that you can share this with your community, everything from YouTube videos in different languages and even voicemail recordings to share, and flyers, many different ways you can distribute the information. It's just a really great opportunity for households to get that support they need for the devices or broadband that they need to be connected. And it doesn't have to be a family household with children. It can also just be adults. And yeah, that's all I have. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Were you there, John, or I?
Great. Thank you, Nicole. And so, Dr. Dennison, if you would share your story at San Carlos.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Deborah Dennison, Superintendent at San Carlos Unified School District. Thank you, Hillary. Thank you to John and all the others who have put together this webinar for us to all know what's going on. San Carlos Unified School District is located on the southeastern portion of Arizona on the San Carlos Apache Reservation. We serve about 1,400 students, and we have around 97 to 100 teachers. And prior to the pandemic, we had been working extremely hard on our system, on our school system, to meet the needs of the community. So one of the identified needs under this systemic reform we've been working on was the need for laptop computers, one-to-one laptop for our students. So prior to the pandemic, we had already started the one-to-one laptop computer. So we didn't really have a whole lot of problem there. Where we did have struggles is that the internet access was very limited. And so from the very get-go, again, part of our systemic reform was partnering with the tribal entities and the healthcare system. So I approached Scatui, which is the San Carlos Apache Tribal Utility company, and asked them, they're the sole providers of internet. It's not the very best internet, it's 4G, I believe. And so we asked them if they would help us out, and they said they would help us. So they went across and we got the list, not just San Carlos, but neighboring. San Carlos is the only public school district solely located on the San Carlos Apache Reservation. The Fort Thomas is just off the reservation, and Globe is to our west off the reservation as well. So they also provided free internet access to those students that did not have it or may have had it in the past but couldn't afford it anymore. And so they did that for about a year. So in around March of this past of 2021, as somewhere between January and March, they just cut off everybody. So the students that could not even get access because they didn't have, we were able to purchase what are called Hubble devices. And overall, we also had the learning management system that we were one of that 25% that John mentioned that had a learning management system that was able to be used. Schoology is what we use, and teachers got trained. We really did a lot of training in the fourth quarter of the first year on the pandemic. And so overall, we spent around $982,561 just on the software programs and our technology needs. So that was a huge expense for us. And so moving forward, we found out that those Hubble devices that are run from Verizon or the cellular networks that are out there would get really overcrowded too during certain times, and it would end up not being as successful. So going back to our choices now, Scutui, so somehow we're going to have to either do a satellite, which I noticed somebody, Mr. Nate was questioning in the chat box, something of that nature, or somehow working with Scutui again to get them to get the 5G. 5G, to my understanding, is coming, and it's already all the way to Safford, but we're not connected to that 5G. I don't know why. So in a sense, we're held hostage because, as I mentioned, and I don't know if I mentioned it in this webinar, but San Carlos community, the communities are very, very high poverty. We have 100% free and reduced lunch. So I know that we'll qualify for a lot of this. And we're right now at the point where we have about 1,500 Chromebooks that need to be replaced. It's going to cost us another $731,000 just to replace the Chromebooks that we have had. We've had those now for a couple of years. So those are some of the issues that we're having. And we got through the school year where we did okay. We had to manage the timing of our classes to be so that they do hour-and-a-half long classes, and then they have office hours where the students can get help from their teachers or from their success coaches. The system that we developed during the times that they weren't in class, if they were having challenges on their homework or whatever, they would be able to go to the teacher or contact the teacher through Schoology and get extra help, or get on and see other ways to get help through different people throughout the process of working with them on distance learning. We felt like overall, even given some of these setbacks that we had with being cut off of Scutui, the internet provider, we felt like we did really well overall with our system that we put together that we've decided that we will keep the Arizona online learning for those students that still want to. We did, like you'll probably hear from our next superintendent, because I believe this is the case in many districts, that there were some successes, real success stories that came out of this issue that we had with being in a pandemic and not many cases scrambling. Our teachers have gotten so good at the Schoology that some of them are even willing to continue to the online learning. So some of our students really enjoyed the online learning more than being in person. But overall, I think majority of them want to come back to school in person. So that's what we're approaching. We're approaching the online to continue, but also to open up fully to those students that want to return. And so this will be this is a very informational webinar to help us to move forward on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dennison. That's really wonderful to hear about all the things that you had in place ahead of time and everything that your school district did to support your students and your communities. I know every school district here, it was more than just the broadband and the devices that that there's everybody's school district really pulled together as a community effort. And there may be some more questions on the way, but I'd like to now turn to Dr. Eggleston and Mr. DeArmond to talk about Geary County's experience.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to share the Geary County story. And let me say congratulations to my colleague on successfully navigating through this past year. I know you and your staff have worked hard, so congratulations to you on a job well done as well. At Geary County Schools, we're located in Junction City, which is right next door to the Fort Riley Army Post. 52% of our students are connected to the military. Parents are actually wearing the uniform. And so we have about 7,000 students. 54% of those students are on free and reduced lunch. We have 5 schools that are on post and 13 that are in the surrounding area. And so last March of 2019, our governor initiated an executive order telling us that we would go to remote learning or virtual learning. Of course, we all went into somewhat of a tailspin because we were out, believe it or not, during enjoying spring break when this executive order was initiated. So we returned scrambling and really putting our heads together to figure out how we were going to react to this executive order. So from March until the end of the school year, we had to launch our virtual learning or remote learning, and a series of events took place. One, we had to make sure everyone had the one-to-one devices or computers. That would be teachers and students. And for those students who lived in remote areas or as well as teachers, we provided them with hotspots. And so that helped us in developing the connectivity that we needed. My Chief Information Officer, Mr. DeArmond, is going to share in the story with me today. But we learned a lot of things about how to better serve our community. We learned a lot about the needs of our community in a way that we had never envisioned before. Normally in a school district, you think about serving meals, you think about how you're going to connect to those parents who may be homeless or students who may be in some type of legal trouble. But this required us to really connect to our parents in a way far greater than anything we had ever experienced. We launched several surveys in order to determine the needs of our families, as well as how to provide access to technology and the internet. And so throughout this event, it helped us realize the services we would need to move forward with for the current year. We have, and I do say thank you to all of our staff, Mr. DeArmond and his staff. We have been in school this entire year in person. Now, out of the 7,000 students that we have, roughly about 1,900 students started the school year in remote learning. And since then, about 1,000 students have returned back to in-person learning. And I think a lot of that was just due to the safety measures that have been implemented and the level of comfort teachers and parents throughout the community have in our ability to keep everyone safe. At this time, Mr. DeArmond, I'm gonna turn it over to you and then I'll return with more of our story. But if you would talk a little bit about what took place in your department and how we work together in order to address the learning gaps and the needs of our students.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Eggleston. As Dr. Eggleston mentioned, we kicked off with a bunch of surveys that we sent out to parents. We really needed to know who needed internet at home, how many students do you have in your house. As John mentioned earlier, about